Hey there. So, Season 6 patch notes just dropped. Just watched the live show and they're up on Reddit now. Apologies for it being on Reddit. There's not actually the official patch notes up on the site yet. And obviously I want to get this out as quickly as possible, so I'm going to use the Reddit ones. So sorry if it doesn't look amazing, but I did want to get this out quickly, so let's get right into it. So first up on here is a bunch of Project Olympus improvements. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard a lot about this, because all this was revealed yesterday, and we've been talking about it for the past 3 months or so with these sort of changes that have been coming, like crossplay, cross-progression, and stuff like that. But I will go briefly over this sort of stuff, but if you've heard about this before, I'll leave a timestamp on screen to skip over all this Project Olympus stuff. So first up, crossplay. Xbox One and Switch are going to be able to crossplay first, and then PC are going to get added in later depending on how well it goes. Normal modes will be crossplay by default on all platforms, but there is an option to opt out of it if you want to. And ranked game modes will not be crossplay for now, and they'll be platform specific, because they're going to see how well it works out in casuals with balancing matches and things, and see if it really affects things, and then they're going to bring it into ranked if they can. Cross progression is basically what it says on the tin. You get all your progress from all of your accounts getting merged together into one high-res account. This includes worshippers, skins, achievements, ranks, all that sort of stuff. So if you have 300 worshippers on Bologna on your Xbox account and 150 worshippers on your PC account, you now have 450 on your merged account. And they're going to be releasing more updates on exactly how you link and merge these accounts across platforms later on. Role queue, once again, this has been explained before, but essentially you'll be able to queue with a primary role and a secondary role. This is only for Conquest and Ranked Conquest. And then the matchmaking will do its thing as it normally does, selecting 10 people for the match, and then after it's selected those 10 people, it will do role distribution. If there are tie scenarios where 2 people want mid as their primary role, then it will look at MMR first in Ranked. So if 2 people want mid, the person with the higher MMR gets their primary role, and you'll probably get your secondary role if you have the lower MMR. And also, each match you don't get your preferred roles will increase your chances of getting given it next match. So it's a sort of pity timer type thing where if you're queuing with mid as your primary role for 4 games in a row and you don't get it any of those games, you're pretty insanely likely to get it on the 5th game, for example. A little bit of ranked information. So ranked will be soft reset in 6.1. We're not likely to have a hard reset anytime in the near future. Soft resets usually do the job. TP gain has been overall increased, which allows you to progress through the ranks at a more rapid pace to match the reduced split length, because they are reducing splits to 6 splits of 2 months a year. And the first rank split is going to be ending on patch 6.5. Rewards for God Leaderboard ranks are no longer existent, probably because people are just abusing these sort of things, especially in Duel, it's really easy to get high up the leaderboards and just farm those rewards, so they're just taking those away entirely. The skin and loading frame bonuses for 75 games and 150 games throughout all of Season 6 are still going to be a thing. Here it says 75 games and 150 games, so I'm not sure if they're actually making it so that it is just play 150 games, whereas now it's 150 wins. So if they are changing that, I like that, because I think having to play 300 games, assuming you have a 50% win rate, 300 games, 150 wins, having to play that many games in ranked is just a bit tedious. For me, anyway. You also have winners chest for 15 wins in ranked, and also 50 gems for each split for 75 wins in ranked. So, 50 gems isn't really a whole lot, but if you do play for all 6 splits, 75 wins each, which is a lot of rank to play, but you can get 300 free gems that way. And for the first split, it looks like there will be normal qualifying games, but then starting in 6.5 with the start of the second split of the year, there's going to be no more qualifying games, and everyone is going to start in bronze. And they've also allowed us to see our MMR now. We've been teased about this sort of stuff, but being able to see your MMR, I think is a good change. A lot of people are going to be oh yeah, people are going to just BM people based on their MMR, but it is only you that can see your MMR. They've specified this, no one else can see it, it's only you. So if you go around giving out your MMR and you get BM'd for it, that's kind of your fault. A lot of people sometimes do get focused really in on the numbers. If you lose a game and see your MMR decrease by 20, it kind of hurts a little bit, but for me, that's more of a motivation. Alright, so on to the actually new stuff that wasn't revealed in yesterday's show. So first up, item balance. With the blessings, they've done a lot of changes to non-conquest blessings, which I will just cover quickly because I'm not too interested in it, but for those of you who do use these sort of things, dual players, Jorks players, whatever, you can read these. Essentially, the overarching theme with this was that Attacker's Blessing, Defender's Blessing, and Specialist Blessing were all way too easy to complete. You would have them complete within the first 3 minutes of the game, which in comparison to the Conquest-based blessings was really quick. So they're reducing all that, and then also they're trying to buff Defender's and Specialist Blessing a little bit to be on par with Attacker's Blessing, because as it is right now, Attacker's Blessing is way too powerful in non-conquest game modes. They've also done a little bit with Warrior's Blessing to try and bring it back into solo lane a little bit, because, of all the Guardian's Blessing and Mage's Blessing meta we've seen in solo lately. They've essentially reverted the health and mana restored nerf that they gave it before, so now it's back up to 40 from 30. And then they've also given it 5 extra protections. I'm not really too sure about these buffs. I don't think it really fixes the core problem with Warrior's Blessing in solo lane, which is that it just makes people tanky and makes the lane more boring. Like, I personally really prefer the meta with old starter items, with Death Toll and Bluestone, where there was more damage and more clear and things, so you had potential to make better outplays. Like, Warrior's Blessing is really just like, I don't really want to call it a crutch, because it's kind of not, but it's like something that, like, it makes people really hard to kill, and if they misplay, like, they'll usually survive, whereas, like, with more damage-focused starter items in solo lane, I think I prefer that. But hopefully this should push Guardian's Blessing out of solo lane a little bit, especially with other buffs later on to Warriors that's gonna, like, put a little bit more emphasis on getting pressure from solo lane. So they've only made changes to one relic, that being Horrific Emblem. Obviously, it showed up enormously at Worlds, and the pro players really showed everyone how powerful this relic can be in duo lane. It is interesting to me that they haven't touched Shell or Sprint though, because I think they're close to on a similar power level, and if you do buy Sprint, it completely counters Horrific Emblem almost entirely. But they've bumped down the slow and the attack speed slow both by 10% on this, so that should really take it a hit in the early game. However, the upgraded Horrific Emblem isn't really nerfed as much. Like, the slow will still be 30%, attack speed slow still 25%, which is really powerful, and even a 15% damage decrease is still really good. Alright, so consumables. This one is actually a really big change. So it's the Elixir of Speed, which is 2,000 gold, and it increases your movement speed by 18% permanently. This won't stack with boots though. This effect lasts X minutes, I'm not really sure what they mean there. They showed on the patch notes that it's essentially meant to be an infinite duration, and it's only available in Conquest game modes. So for those of you who haven't realised yet, this is a replacement for your boots that allows for 6 item builds in Conquest. So you'll still build boots early game because obviously they're the most cost effective choice early game to get movement speed and some stats. But then once you get past like sort of 30 minutes time where you're getting a lot of gold, you can actually sell those boots, buy this elixir for 2,000 gold, and then buy a 6th item. This could be huge in terms of like build diversity, and what kind of things can emerge from this is going to be really interesting. Like, I'm thinking some kind of Devo's Execution or quad crit build for hunters could be really insane. But honestly, a lot of different builds could come out of this, like mages with like 6 damage items or 5 damage items and 1 tank item could be really, really powerful. It is a little bit of a head-on way to deal with it, like literally saying buy this consumable so you don't have to use boots. I think I would prefer if they did it sort of a little more light-handed way, where it's like they're trying to buff other movement speed items and make people want to sell their boots rather than just selling them and essentially rebuying them but then freeing up an item slot. But I think this change will give a lot more like build diversity in the late game and will change up the meta quite a bit. Alright, so on to proper item balance. First up being magical items. So essentially what they're doing with this Cursed Orb and Doom Orb thing is that they're making Doom Orb a tier 3 item. The Cursed Orb is essentially very similar to what we have in current Doom Orb, but a little bit cheaper and a little bit less stats. But you can then upgrade it into Doom Orb, which is a 3,300 gold item, so it better be damn powerful, but it has 135 base magical power, which is really insane. But then it also has the passive, which is essentially an amped up version of what Doom Orb currently has, which can give you an extra 30 power and an extra 5% movement speed, so effectively the item when at full stacks, which is reasonable to keep it stacked because the last 15 seconds, is going to give you 165 magical power, 11% movement speed, 200 mana and 25 MP5, which for the cost I don't think is that insane, but you can never underestimate 165 magical power. That is a lot of power. That's more than like a fully stacked Book of Thoth, I think. Speaking of Book of Thoth, that's also received some changes. So Book of Souls, the tier 2 of all those book items, has been decreased in power from 65 to 55. That's mainly just to stop people, well not stop people entirely, but to like discourage people from building just tier 2 book, and they want people to be building blessings essentially. So for Book of Thoth, they made it a little bit cheaper. The passive conversion is now like much more amped up, but it only affects mana gain from items. So if you're building Book of Thoth with like a ton of extra mana items, so you're building like Book of Thoth into CDR boots, Soul Reaver, Book of the Dead, like all these items with a ton of mana on, it's going to be more effective than it is currently. But if you're just building it as a standalone item in a default mage build with no real mana synergies, it's going to be much less powerful. So it's not so much of a build it every game on every character type of item as it is now, and you may be considering like Warlock Staff or no stack builds with like a Chronos Pendant Rush now, because it's not as powerful, it's just a kind of catch-all item. But if you are building specific synergies with it, it can be even more powerful than it is currently, which is really strong. Soul Reaver is just getting a straight up nerf. Essentially, if you're trying to proc Soul Reaver multiple times on the same target, they're going to take only 50% of the damage from subsequent hits. So gods like Agni, who could like bomb, stun, flame wave, bomb, and proc Soul Reaver like 5 times in that duration, was absolutely ridiculous. So now you're only going to be taking 50% of the damage from all those subsequent hits. So you get 1 at full damage and then like 4 at 50% damage, so it's a lot less damage overall. I'm not sure if this is exactly the way I wanted them to take Soul Reaver, because I like Soul Reaver's synergies with gods that can pump out a lot of instances of damage over time, like it's specifically good on Agni because of that. I would have rather just seen them hit the passive numbers in general, like take down the percentage or something, because I do like the fact that it synergizes well with gods that can proc it multiple times, but I guess it still does synergize like that, just a little bit less so. Obsidian Shard has just had some minor increases. You're paying 150 more gold for 10 more power, like it's not really going to affect anything too much, I don't think. I guess you're investing a little bit more gold, so you are going to be also investing in it when you're really going to get a lot of benefit from the passive, rather than just investing in it because it's a cheap item. But overall, it's not going to change too much with Obsidian Shard. You're still picking it up against tanks as you would in any normal build. Typhon's Fangs had its magical lifesteal increase from 10 to 15%, so this is actually a little bit of a bigger buff than it seems. Because of Typhon's Fang passive, it's actually more of like a 7.25% magical lifesteal increase plus a little bit of extra power as well. I still don't think the item's going to be too good because it essentially has to be built with Bancroft's Talon, which means very few gods actually make good use of it. Maybe it'll be good on like Sol now, maybe even Freya, and it'll obviously still be good on Anubis as it always has been. Dynasty Plate Helm gets 10 more magical power. This could be pretty big, I think, especially with the Book of Thoth nerf. You know, maybe we go back to sort of Dynasty Plate Helm rush builds in mid, I'm not sure. So Stone of Bindings had an adjustment essentially. It still functions very similarly, but instead of providing like an aura buff once you hit a CC to like your surrounding allies, it's instead just going to debuff the people that you hit with the CC. It makes a lot more sense to have it this way. Like if you're going to blink in and Sylvan Assault, you're going to be reducing the protections of the people you actually hit with the Sylvan Assault rather than like giving your team pen, which felt a little bit weird. Moving on to physical items. Malice has had an entirely new passive. So successfully hitting a crit on an enemy will subtract 2 seconds from all of your abilities currently on cooldown except your ult, so just all of your basic abilities. And it also has an internal cooldown of 5 seconds. So Malice definitely did need some changes. It really wasn't built outside of like specific cases like Naja or Serket. Since on regular ability-based hunters like Uller, it just really wasn't worth going for that kind of a build. You're better just going off full ability-based really than going into crit. Whereas this way, 2 seconds off of your abilities is useful for like most hunters, so this may find its way into like popular crit builds now, especially with nerfs to other crit items we're seeing further down. Poison Star's seeing some nerfs, thank god. It wasn't nerfed enough last time and it still needed some. The cost increase and 5% crit is actually pretty relevant, so I think Poison Star is not the necessarily like go-to early game crit item anymore. Especially when you consider that Wind Demon has also had a 100 cost decrease, so they're actually very similar in cost now. I still think decreasing the enemy's damage output is more powerful than increasing your attack speed, so I think Poison Star is like kind of on a similar level to Wind Demon now, but still a little bit better and a little bit cheaper. So I think you still build Poison Star over Wind Demon in a lot of builds, but I think they're closer now. Odysseus Bow just has an extra 10% scaling on the basic attack proc effect where it chains to multiple targets. Not really going to change much about the item. You still build it when you want a hell of a lot of attack speed, and the passive is just like a little extra bit. Silver Branch Bow, power increased from 20 to 30. I honestly thought it had 30 before this, so I guess an extra 10 power could be very useful for it. Especially when you consider that you can now have 6 item builds in Conquest, so you could go like a Silver Branch, Oboe, like really high attack speed build and potentially get a lot of value out of that item. Even currently, you can see Silver Branch Bow giving you up to like 60 power when you have like a steroid active, so with a 6 item build, you could be getting like 80 power from Silver Branch, which is really good. So the sort of aggressive magical defense items of Runic Shield and Anchile have had some adjustments, essentially buffing Runic Shield by 50 health and nerfing Anchile by 150 gold. Usually you want to pick up Anchile more than Runic Shield on these type of things, but I think Anchile is going to be more of like a niche item now, where you pick it up against gods like Anubis, where it's really powerful, silencing out is 1. And Runic Shield is probably going to be like the generic, oh, I want to shut down magical characters sort of item now. Some big changes to the hammer tree. So Cudgel and the Shillelagh have just been getting some overall like quality of life changes as you build into those bigger items. So Cudgel, historically renowned as like the worst tier 1 item in the game, is getting 5 power and 50 health off, so that's actually kind of balances out. What they're essentially trying to do with this whole tree though is make it a little more aggressive focus, so like aggressive warriors and even some assassins can pick these items up. Same with Shillelagh, 5 extra physical power, but they've also decreased the cost, which is pretty relevant because 1500 gold would make it impossible to start with this item in like solo lane. 1300 gold now opens you up potentially to getting this, because you can get 4 potions with it as well. And Blackthorn Hammer, which is already seeing a little bit of a resurgence on some warriors in solo lane, is getting 10 more physical power and also arguably what I think is a buff to the passive, which is the cooldown essentially. You're going to have the cooldown reduction more than you're going to have the mana regen now. Instead of being at 50%, it's at 25% mana. So I think Blackthorn Hammer is going to be really good now. Probably not as like a first item, but if you go like something like Boots, Breastplate into Blackthorn, like 450 health for 2000 gold, plus power and mana regen and cooldown reduction and all this stuff, it has a lot of stats on it for the price. And a similar thing with Runeforged Hammer, they're giving it 15 extra power, which is a pretty big deal, and 50 less health, which isn't so much of a big deal. So Runeforged Hammer, a little bit of a buff there, and they're also giving it like extra power to make it a more of an aggressive option. So moving on to like all class items. So Gauntlet of Thieves has a 75 health increase. I'm not sure this is really going to fix the like overarching problems with the item where you're spending a lot of gold on essentially nothing and you have to stack it up to get any worthwhile value out of it. The 75 extra health up front does help a little bit. Like if we have quite a defensive meta where you can just sit there and stack Thieves, it's still going to be a very powerful item. But it always has those weaknesses where you really can't play aggressive if you build Thieves second because you have just no defenses basically. So it's still going to be a sort of a risk versus reward item, but if you do stack it up, it's probably one of the most cost effective items for like the health and the defenses that it does give. Emerald Talisman, 4 more MP5, who really cares? And then Stone of Gaia, the heal occurs much faster now, it's actually half the time to get the full heal back, so you're not going to get bursted down so much. Like a lot of the time when you had Stone of Gaia, you get knocked up in a fight, but you get bursted so quick that you can't actually get the full heal off. This way you heal faster so you can maybe survive through that knock up and get away or chase the kill, whatever you need to do. And they've also decreased the internal cooldown from 60 to 45 seconds, so you get the effect a little bit more. I don't really see Stone of Gaia becoming like a huge like major pickup on a lot of gods, but it'll probably see a little bit more play now. Shield of Regrowth, just a small cost decrease and some regen improvements. Shield of Regrowth really is a kind of niche item that's only good on certain gods like Thanatos and stuff like that. So it really depends what kind of gods are in the meta for a Shield of Regrowth is really good. I think it's still good enough, honestly. And finally, Spectral Armor gets 10 more physical protections, and the critical strikes only deal 50% of their bonus damage instead of 60% now. Spectral Armor, similar to Shield of Regrowth, is really niche, and it kind of depends what the meta's like. If like every hunter's building crit, and they also have like Najas and Circuits in jungle, this item is really good. Maybe if my prediction of like quad crit hunter builds happen in this season, you may want a Spectral Armor. And all of the masks are also getting adjustments. Lono's mask has been nerfed again. They merely stated the reason for this was Fenrir at Worlds using it, but like, I don't really know if they need to nerf the item too much. I think they maybe should look at adjusting Fenrir. Like, it's the fact that Fenrir in his ult with double protections and Lonos is basically unkillable. It's not really a problem with Lonos, it's more of a problem with Fenrir, I think. Like, you really don't see anyone building Lonos outside of Fenrir and maybe Naja in support. Rangda's masks have now increased the ability damage from 15 to 20% to match the basic attack damage. I really don't see this item being picked up anyway. Like, people don't want to take increased damage, that's just a bad thing to want. I think Rangda's is always just going to be that kind of fun item where you build like Assassin Guardians and have a bit of fun. Like, I think if Rangda's was actually a meta item, it'd be really unfun, so I don't really want them to buff it too much. And Bumba's just got some power increases across the board, 10 physical power, 15 magical power. Not really going to change who buys the item, I don't think. It's still going to be good on niche gods like Morrigan. Though notably now with boots being out of the meta, you can build Bumba's mask and also stack the movement speed with that new consumable, so that could be powerful. Alright, I know this is getting a little bit long, but there's a lot of stuff to cover in the Season 6 patch notes, so let's move on to some god balance. So warriors are getting base HP increased by 10 and HP per level increased by 3. This is across all warriors. So early game, this isn't really that relevant at all. It's not really meant to be like a major increase, but late game, 70 health is something, I guess. And it is being applied to every single warrior in the game, so you don't want to do it too much or you might end up with some really overpowered warriors. AMC gets a decreased cooldown on Swarm, hopefully helping him clear waves a little bit better and stay safer in the early game. And Honey gets a decreased mana cost. This is something they've been doing with a lot of gods over the last couple of years, like the older gods that have like 95 mana cost for some reason are getting reduced a lot. Anubis' Mummify is getting an increased stun duration in the early game, but as you rank it up it still caps out at the 2 seconds that it does now. I don't think this really fixes any of the inherent problems with Anubis, but I guess maybe you don't rank the 2 anymore and you rank the 1 instead, which could be powerful, I don't know really, I don't play much Anubis. Alquang is getting a new passive, again. Every 20 seconds Alquang gets a stack in his Dragon King's sword. As long as he has a stack, his next non-ultimate ability that deals damage to an enemy god will consume the stack and have its cooldown reduced by 2 seconds and also heal Alquang for 5% of his max health. And successfully getting an execute with the ult will fully recharge his sword. This to me really screams solo lane Alquang. Like, you can really just kind of sit in solo lane and just be healing 5% of your max health like every 25 seconds, which is definitely really good. Like, Alquang never really had that reliable sustain in solo lane because his sustain before was tied to executing people with his ultimate, which, unless you were getting really fed, you weren't really doing in solo lane in the early game. Whereas now he just gets that 5% of his max health every 20 seconds, it's sort of like a Warrior's Blessing passive almost. Bacchus, this is a big one. Chug is now available at level 1 and has a rank 0. Doesn't provide any protections at the rank 0, but does cost 35 mana, and it will now provide 40% Drunker meter at all ranks. So this is really insane. Like, Bacchus can have his full passive benefit, which is 20 power and I believe something like 10% damage mitigation, 5%, I don't know. He basically gets a lot of free stats at level 1 out of the fountain, and his 2 will also have the slow, and his 3 will have the stun, which is really fucking crazy. I think we're going to see a lot of support Bacchus, probably some solo lane Bacchus as well with these changes. I think he's going to be really good. They've essentially eliminated Bacchus' weak early game now. Bastet's Razor Whip is getting a physical power scaling buff from 20% back up to 25%. I don't actually know when they changed that, but it used to always be 25%. And also similar to AMC, she's an old god with really high mana costs that are getting reduced now. I mean, yeah, it's a good change, I guess, but I think Bastet really needs more significant work to make her viable, like an ultimate rework or something like that. Baron Samedi still getting more nerfs even this far down the line. Decreasing the bonus healing based on missing health from his 2 down by 2.5%, and also decreasing the life of the party total health damage down by 5%. They've stated the reason for this being trying to stop tank Baron Samedi being so strong, which, yes, tank Baron Samedi is very strong, but I think having a mage like that is really good in Smite. Like, having a mage that can build tanky and still be successful is really good for the mage class, I think. But I guess Baron nerfs are Baron nerfs, I'm always up for those. Bologna's getting a small buff to early game base damage on Eagle's Rally. 100 was quite low in comparison to a lot of other warrior ultimates, even though she does get a lot of other benefits from this ability, so I like the change. Kabrakan's ultimate is getting some more, like, I guess you could call it a quality of life change, but it is sort of a buff as well. Essentially, it's going to be a lot easier to hit enemies with the damage of this ability. Instead of it being like a really narrow kind of corridor, then expanding with the walls, it's just going to do like a damage in a rectangle in front of him, essentially, so it's going to be a lot easier to hit the damage of the ability. Kamazot's Vampire Bat's passive has its buff duration increased from 210 seconds to 300 seconds, and it now persists through his death. That kind of makes sense, honestly. Like, losing the passives right on your death is really kind of tilting. Like, you'll get all this work in, like, getting all those stacks up, you'll die once and you'll lose them all. Like, it just kind of sucks. Whereas now, like, as long as you're playing decently, you will have this passive up basically 100% of the time now. Which gives Kamazot's a lot more sustain, like, even in the solo lane he could use this as well, but mostly for jungle. Kunos' ultimate is going back down to 90 seconds. I think they changed this, like, season 4, something like that. They upped it to 100 seconds, it's going back down to 90. And also Bramble Blast is getting, like, an early game base damage increase, but it still tops out at 200. 40 early game damage is really kind of abysmal. Like, it does do tick damage as well, but that's also really low, so increasing the base damage on this is fine, I think. Kunos hasn't been seeing a lot of play lately, so this is probably a good change. Fafnir's Dragon Breath does more damage late game now. I didn't really see Dragon Breath as something that really needed buffing for Fafnir, but apparently High-Res did. Apparently, like, when you're trying to Dragon Breath someone, it's doing about 3 damage per tick late game or something like that, so that's their reasoning for this. Argus is finally going up to 90 seconds like it should be. I have no idea why this was lower cooldown than like everyone else's ultimate when it's this powerful, so that's a good change. And on the flip side, Hercules' ultimate will now scale down from 90 to 70 seconds. Once again, I do like this change, not just because I'm a Hercules main. Like, his ultimate is just damage and he really needs it up in teamfights to actually be useful late game, so having it up every 70 seconds or like every 50 seconds if you have CDR should be really good. Because like a lot of other warrior ultimates make a big impact on the teamfight as a whole, whereas Hercules is literally just damage, so having it on a lower cooldown is fine, I think. Isis finally got the range increases we've all been asking for like years. Dispel Magic and Circle of Protection now have a much increased deploy range, which is really useful. King Arthur has like a million bug and animation fixes. I won't read all these. If you want to actually read them all, pause the video. His 3 in both forms will now give you 2 energy per hit instead of 1. And Sundering Strike has a decreased charge range from 16 to 12. So the balance changes aren't going to really impact him too much, but I like the strategy they're approaching King Arthur here. Like, they're going to fix him up a load, see how he performs, and then like buff or nerf him afterwards. So apparently Loki's win rate, pick rate, and ban rate stats have all shot up in like the last 2 months, so they're going to tank him into the ground as they promised they would do if Loki ever became meta. His damage progression is changing from 1 on the first hit to 0.75 on the first hit. This seems like a super small change, but considering Loki will auto-attack like 3 or 4 times with auto-attack cancels in his combo, it's actually taking a lot of damage off. Like when his basic attacks alone are doing like 400 damage, that's like 100 damage off of every single basic attack. It's like, yeah, it will come out faster, but really it doesn't really matter how fast it comes out. Loki just AA cancels anyway. And on his Vanish, they finally removed the damage mitigation, which made no sense for him to have in the first place. Like, I'm not a Loki hater, but when he vanishes, like he's a stealth god, he's supposed to like vanish and get away, not vanish and tank a bunch of hits. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. So I'm glad they've removed that. Osiris' Sickle Strike is getting a base damage increase of 10 per rank. This is a little more relevant than you might think because it is a 5-second cooldown ability on the base. So that 10 early game is actually pretty relevant when you're throwing your sickle at someone like 6 times in like a minute. When you're hitting that many times, it does actually add up. And an extra 5 damage on Spirit Frail at every rank really isn't going to matter. Like 5 damage on an ability with that long cooldown really doesn't matter. Pele's power and duration of her passive has been reduced, thank god. The passive on Pele is the most frustrating part of her by far. Like annihilating her in a fight and then having her just heal like 100 damage per auto and like AoE heals with Soul Eater and stuff were just absolutely fucking stupid, so I'm glad they're hitting the passive. That's what they need to hit Pele, I think. Poseidon got some physical protection changes, apparently to make him more in line with other mages at 2.6 per level. The Thoth changes, they finally fucking listened, boys! They made him a proper artillery mage. So he gets a little bit more damage on the 1. They've removed the stun on the 2, which is what we've been asking for like 2 years or however fucking long this god's been out, I don't even know. But it will now pierce through enemies as it did on release, and will root the first god hit and slow everyone else. So it's sort of like an in-between with the stun and what they had at release where it just slowed. Like it's going to root the first one, so if someone's diving on you, you have that root. But then it will also go through and damage other people behind if you line it up correctly. So the root and slow both last 1.5 seconds, and it's a 30% slow at all ranks, which is actually pretty fucking powerful. But just taking the stun off of this ability really helps with like the frustration factor of thought of him just like dashing away, insta-stunning you, and you can't do shit about it. Like if he's just rooting you, you can jump after him and stuff like that. And Final Judgment, they've increased the scaling from 100% to 120%. Seems like a big deal, but I'm kind of fine with this. Like, I'm fine with Thoth dealing way too much damage. It's when he deals way too much damage and then dashes away and insta-stuns you when I have a problem. And the final god change is Zeus. This one's mainly aimed at other game modes because apparently Zeus is performing just fine in Conquest, but in other game modes he's absolutely dominating. The detonate damage is being adjusted so that it's less on the base damage and more on the scaling, and also a little bit more for having just one charge on someone, but a little bit less for the full 3 charge detonate. And his ultimate is being adjusted more towards the late game, taking off some of the base damage early on, but increasing the scaling a little bit and increasing the damage at the top end. I can't really comment too much on these Zeus changes because I don't play a whole lot of like Clash and Joust and Arena where apparently it's performing really well, but for Conquest I guess these changes are fine. On to Conquest balance and changes. So there's a whole lot of text here, I'll just try and summarise it. So the kill bounty adjustments, essentially if you're killing someone that's way over leveled from you, you get way more gold. And if you're killing someone that's much lower level than you, you will get way less gold. So if you're like really far behind and you're like level 10 in ADC and the enemy jungler that's level 14 comes to gank you and you get the shutdown, you're going to get a lot more gold for that now. The Totem of Ku is the new solo lane objective they've been teasing. This is located directly behind the Fire Giant, which is sort of like in the middle entrance from the jungle into the solo lane. It's a neutral structure that isn't going to attack you. It has base health and protections and it will increase in health each time it's taken, so it gets more tanky over the match if you're taking it a lot. It spawns in at 1 minute and will respawn 1 minute after it's taken. And it will despawn at 15 minutes, so after 15 minutes this is irrelevant, but it's mainly an early game thing. Essentially the way you take this structure is by pumping damage into it, and essentially the person that gets to the damage cap first on the totem wins it for their team. So it's not like something that can just be sniped. Like say it has 300 base health and you do 290 damage to it, an enemy can't just come in and auto attack it once and take it off you. They have to actually do 300 damage to it to win it. So it does promote that kind of aggressive playstyle, like if you can shove the enemy out to tower, you can probably get this totem for free and then give your team this buff. So essentially what this buff does is it buffs all of your team's towers with an aura buff that gives all allied gods that are in the area 5% movement speed and 25 MP5. You also get 25 gold on each team member when you take this totem, which isn't really a whole lot, but considering you can take it every single minute, it could add up. So the buff lasts as long as you stay in the tower and then for 10 seconds after leaving the tower. And the empowered tower area lasts 1 minute, so essentially the respawn timer, so you can have this up like near 100% of the time if you're constantly pressuring solo and taking this. So I like this a lot. It's not like a way to like snowball solo lane, it's a way to snowball your team from solo lane. So you get the pressure, you take this, and then it helps like if your teammates are getting pushed under the tower, they get bonus MP5 and that sort of stuff. So instead of solo lane being, oh, I'm going to be level 20 at 18 minutes and just carry my team, it's going to be like, oh, I'm a pretty normal level, but I buff my teammates up so much that they're actually carrying the game for me. We'll see how this works out, but I think on paper this looks really good. Onto the big Gold Fury changes they've been teasing for a while. So Gold Fury now has 2 additional forms, so it still has the base form, but there's also Oni Gold Fury and Primal Gold Fury. So the first spawn of the match will always be normal Gold Fury as it is now, and each time the Gold Fury is killed it will be randomly chosen from the 3 Gold Furies, and it will avoid repeats. So you're not going to get Primal Gold Fury straight into Primal Gold Fury, but you can get Primal into Oni or Primal into normal Gold Fury. So both Oni and Primal will provide a lesser gold reward than normal Gold Fury, but provide additional benefits. Oni Gold Fury essentially like buffs the next round of minions spawned in all 3 lanes. Ajax essentially said that this is sort of like an in-between normal minion waves and fire waves, so it's not going to be like you're spawning 3 fire waves as soon as you kill Oni Gold Fury, but it's like sort of an in-between. But this will also stack with fire waves, so you could take some Phoenixes, have fire waves, take an Oni Gold Fury, and then stack that buff on top of your fire waves and make a big push for Titan. And then the Primal Gold Fury will give your team a permanent 5% increased damage to jungle camps and jungle bosses, which will stack up to 3 times. So essentially, if like throughout the course of your game you manage to get 3 of these Primal Furies, you can burn Fire Giant 15% faster, which could be a big deal. Not to mention if you manage to get this early game, it does allow people to farm the jungle a lot faster, which could potentially like snowball your jungle or something like that if you get it as like the second Gold Fury of the game. So I do like these overall. The one thing I don't really like is the randomness. I'm not really sure how they could fix this, because like, if they just go normal Gold Fury, Oni, Primal, normal Oni, Primal like that, it might be like a little bit predictable and like won't be as cool as it being random. But I think if they could add some way into the map where you could like almost sort of designate what the next one will be, I'm not entirely sure how they would do that, but like some way for maybe the killing team of the Gold Fury, or just in general, like to be able to decide which one the next will be and plan around that will be a better way of doing it. So Fire Giant has the Magma Pools ability back now, but it won't spawn on the pets. There's also a little warning now where like the pool will grow in size to its maximum size in 1 second, and like you can get out of the way of it. So it's a little bit less frustrating and it doesn't spawn straight underneath you. And they're also working on some visual indicators for the enhanced Fire Giant so that it seems like it's enhanced, because right now it's just a normal Fire Giant, so they're going to try and enhance it a little bit so you know it is an enhanced Fire Giant when you go to take it. There's some specifics here on like the actual attack pattern of the Fire Giant, so if you want to read these, pause the video. And once again, a slew of jungle changes to like base health and like protections and all that stuff for like all of the different harpies and buff holders and all that stuff. Pause the video if you want to read these. And the final change is that Towers and Phoenix now have a visual effect on them for backdoor protection, so it's sort of like just a visual indicator that like this tower has backdoor protection, so maybe you shouldn't go to take it. And they've also changed it so that if you have a wave that pushes into a tower and then the wave dies, the tower won't gain the backdoor protections back again. They will only gain them back after you leave the tower range. So if you do commit to destroying a tower with a minion wave, you can stay in the range, take a bit of damage, but like keep the backdoor protections removed and shred the tower. But that's about it for the review. Sorry if this one was a little bit long. Season 6 had a lot of specific changes I wanted to give my thoughts on, so it has been a little bit longer. For those wondering when PTS will be, they said sometime early next week, probably Tuesday, so look out for that. Stay tuned to the channel as well for more Season 6 news videos and PTS stuff in the future once that's out, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out, you nerds.